Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Muniba Mazari, and I stand before you today not just as a speaker, not just as an artist, not just as a woman in a wheelchair, but as a living proof that life may break you, but it cannot define you unless you let it. Today, I want to share a story with you, a story that will shock you, move you, and most importantly, inspire you. Because this is not just my story, this is a story of resilience, of pain turned into power, of rejection turned into self-love, and of struggles transformed into strength. We will talk about the life I had before my accident, the moment that changed everything, the way society sees those who are different, and how I learned to rise even when everything was pushing me down. And as I share my journey with you, I want you to remember this is not just about me. This is about every single person in this room who has ever felt lost, broken, or defeated. Because if I can rise, so can you. So stay with me, open your hearts, and let's take this journey together. I was just like any other young girl, full of dreams, full of life, and full of hope. I wanted to paint my own destiny, to create something meaningful, to be someone who made a difference. But sometimes, life has a way of writing our stories before we even get a chance to hold the pen. I was born and raised in a society where the dreams of a girl are often measured by the expectations of others, where the worth of a daughter is not in her ambitions, but in how well she fits into the roles that have already been decided for her. I was no different. Growing up, I had big dreams. I loved painting, I loved writing, I loved the idea of expressing myself in ways that words often fail to capture. I wanted to travel, to explore the world beyond the walls of my home, to experience life in all its colors. But in my world, dreams like that were nothing more than whispers. Whispers that were silenced by tradition, by expectations, by the simple fact that I was a girl. My parents loved me, but they too had their fears. They wanted to protect me, to keep me safe, to make sure I lived a life that was secure. And in their eyes, the safest place for a girl was in the role of a wife. I was 18 when I was told that I would be getting married, not because I was ready, not because I had fallen in love, but because that was what was expected. I remember sitting in my room, looking at my reflection in the mirror, asking myself, is this it? Is this what life is supposed to be? But I didn't say no, because in our culture, a girl saying no is not always an option. So I said yes. I convinced myself that maybe this was the right thing to do, that maybe, just maybe, life had a plan for me that I couldn't see yet. I smiled for the wedding pictures. I played the role of the perfect bride. And I stepped into a new life, carrying the weight of expectations that were never mine to begin with. In the beginning, I tried to believe in the fairy tale. I told myself that happiness would come with time, that love was something that could be learned, that if I did everything right, maybe I would feel the joy that I saw in the movies. But the truth was, I felt like a bird trapped in a cage. I wasn't unhappy because of my husband or my family. I was unhappy because I had lost myself. The girl who once dreamed of painting her own destiny was now living a life that didn't feel like her own. I wanted to ask, what about my dreams? What about my passions? What about me? But I kept quiet because that's what we are taught, to adjust, to compromise, to accept. And then life decided to change everything for me, in ways I never could have imagined. If I had known that one moment, one single event would redefine everything I knew about myself, would I have lived differently? Would I have fought harder for my dreams? Would I have dared to say no? I don't know. What I do know is that sometimes we don't get to choose how our story begins, but we do get to choose how we rise from it. It's strange how life changes in the blink of an eye. One moment you're laughing, making plans for the future, thinking you have all the time in the world, and the next, everything is taken away from you. That's how my life changed, not slowly, not gradually, just in one split second. I still remember that day so vividly, as if it happened yesterday. My husband and I were traveling by car, heading towards our destination. The road stretched ahead of us, endless and quiet. It was just another ordinary day. Nothing felt different. But little did I know that in the next few moments, my life would never be the same again. The car was speeding. I remember telling him to slow down, to be careful. But sometimes words are not enough. Sometimes fate has already decided how things will unfold. And then it happened. The car lost control. Everything around me turned into a blur. I could hear the tires screeching against the road, the deafening sound of metal crashing, and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. For a moment, time stopped. My body was flung out of the car as it tumbled down into a ditch. And then, darkness. I don't remember how long I was unconscious. Minutes, hours. I don't know. But when I opened my eyes, the world around me was unrecognizable. I was lying on the ground, unable to move, unable to feel anything. My body was shattered. I could hear voices, distant and fading, people rushing, someone screaming my name, but I couldn't respond. I couldn't even lift a finger. I was rushed to the hospital, my body broken in ways I couldn't comprehend. My spine was fractured, my ribs were crushed, my right arm was completely shattered, and my legs had multiple fractures. But I didn't understand the severity of it all. I didn't understand what had happened to me. I was in pain, but I thought it was temporary. I thought I would recover. I thought I would be okay. And then the doctors came. I will never forget that moment, the moment that changed everything. The doctor looked at me, his face filled with sympathy, and said the words that shattered me more than the accident itself. "You will never walk again." I stared at him, my mind refusing to accept what he had just said. Never walk again? How was that possible? How could this be real? I wanted to scream to tell him he was wrong, that this was just a nightmare, that I would wake up any second. But deep inside, I knew he wasn't lying. Tears filled my eyes as I tried to move my legs, hoping, praying that I would feel something, anything. But there was nothing. No pain, no sensation, just emptiness. I felt like a prisoner in my own body, a body that had betrayed me. The pain was unbearable. Not just the physical pain, but the pain of losing myself, the pain of realizing that the life I had known was gone forever. I was 21. My whole life was supposed to be ahead of me. I was supposed to run, to dance, to chase my dreams. And now, I couldn't even sit up on my own. I was lying there, helpless, broken, surrounded by machines that beat like a cruel reminder that I was still alive. But I didn't feel alive. I felt like I had already died. And this was just some cruel afterlife where I was trapped in a body that no longer belonged to me. I kept asking myself, why me? What had I done to deserve this? Why was I being punished? I had done everything right. I had been a good daughter, a good wife. I had followed the rules, lived by the expectations. So why was my life destroyed in an instant? I remember closing my eyes, hoping that if I just drifted away, maybe I would wake up in another world. Maybe I would wake up and find that none of this was real. But it was real. And this was just the beginning of my battle. If there is one thing I learned after my accident, it's that people don't always know how to treat someone who is broken. They look at you differently, talk to you differently, as if you are no longer a person, but a tragedy they are forced to acknowledge. Some offer pity, some offer silence, and some just walk away. Lying in that hospital bed, I had already lost so much. My ability to move, my sense of self, my independence. But what I didn't expect was that I would start losing people too. One by one, they began to disappear. At first, there was sympathy. The flowers, the whispered prayers, the hopeful smiles. People said things like, "You are strong, you'll get through this." But deep down, I saw it in their eyes, the fear, the discomfort. They didn't know how to deal with me anymore. I wasn't the same Muniba they had known before. I was no longer the girl who walked beside them, laughed freely, chased her dreams. I was now confined to a hospital bed, unable to do the simplest things without help. And for many, that was too much to bear. And then one day, the person I had promised to spend my life with, the person who was supposed to stand by me in sickness and in health, looked at me and decided I was no longer enough. My husband left. I still remember the moment he walked away, leaving behind nothing but silence. He didn't say much, he didn't have to. His absence said everything. He had made his choice, and for the first time in my life, I realized that love, real love, isn't tested when everything is perfect. It is tested in the darkest moments, in the moments when everything falls apart. And in that test, I was left alone. I wanted to scream, to ask him, why? Was it because I was no longer the woman he had married? Was it because I would never walk again? Was it because I was now a burden, someone he didn't want to carry? But I didn't ask, because deep down I already knew the answer. People don't always leave because they don't love you. Sometimes they leave because they don't know how to love you through your pain. The silence that followed his departure was unbearable. I felt abandoned, unwanted, like my existence had become an inconvenience, and the world around me only made it worse. I started hearing the whispers, those cruel, cutting words that people say when they think you aren't listening. Who will take care of her now? She's just a burden. What kind of future does she have? Some people even came up to me and said, maybe if you had prayed more, this wouldn't have happened. As if my suffering was somehow my fault. As if I had done something to deserve this. Society has a strange way of treating people who are different. It's as if they don't know what to do with you once you no longer fit into their perfect picture. A woman in a wheelchair? That's not part of the fairy tale they want to believe in. That's not the story they want to hear. People stopped seeing me as a person. They only saw the chair, the disability, the brokenness. I remember looking at myself in the mirror one day, really looking. And for the first time, I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. I wasn't just dealing with physical pain. I was carrying the weight of rejection, of judgment, of being treated like I was invisible. And I kept asking myself the same question over and over again. Am I really that worthless? But here's the thing about pain. It either destroys you or it transforms you. I had a choice. I could let their words, their judgments, their abandonment define me, or I could redefine myself. That was the moment I decided if the world wasn't ready to accept me as I was, then I would make them see me in a way they never had before. Here's an emotional and engaging expansion of the fourth key point in Muniba Mazari's storytelling style. Pain changes you, it breaks you into a million pieces, leaving you unrecognizable even to yourself. But in that brokenness, you have a choice. You can either stay shattered, or you can pick up those pieces and build something new, something even stronger than before. I had spent months lying in that hospital bed, drowning in my own sorrow, letting grief consume me. I had lost my ability to walk, I had lost my husband, and worst of all, I had lost myself. My dreams felt like distant memories, my future nothing more than a blur of uncertainty. But then one day, as I was lying in that bed, staring at the ceiling like I had done 1,000 times before, a thought crossed my mind. What if this is not the end? What if this is the beginning of something greater? It wasn't an easy thought to believe. The world had already decided my fate. They had labeled me as someone who needed help, someone who would never achieve anything, someone who would always be dependent. But I knew something they didn't. I still had a fire inside me, and if I couldn't walk, I would crawl. If I couldn't stand, I would rise in other ways. The first thing I did was pick up a paintbrush. I had always loved painting. As a child, colors were my escape. They allowed me to express the things I couldn't say out loud. But after the accident, I had lost touch with that part of me. My right hand was fractured, so I could no longer paint the way I used to, but I told myself if I can't use my right hand, I will learn to paint with my left. And so I did. At first, it was difficult. My hand shook, my strokes were unsteady, and I felt like I would never get it right. But every time I wanted to give up, I reminded myself I had already survived the worst. What was a little struggle compared to that? Day by day, I practiced. I poured all my pain, my anger, my sorrow onto the canvas. And slowly, my paintings became my voice. They spoke when I couldn't. They told my story in ways words never could. And then something incredible happened. People started noticing my work. They saw the colors, the emotions, the strength behind each stroke. And before I knew it, I was no longer just a patient in a hospital bed. I was an artist, but that was just the beginning. I realized that if I could break one barrier, I could break many more. So I asked myself, what else can I do? I started writing. I started speaking. I started sharing my story, not because I wanted sympathy, but because I wanted people to see that even in the darkest moments, there is light. Even when life takes everything from you, it gives you something in return, a chance to rebuild. And then life surprised me again. I became Pakistan's first wheelchair-using model. Me, a woman the world had labeled as a burden. A woman they said had no future. A woman who was supposed to live in the shadows, unseen, unheard. I still remember the day I sat in front of the camera for my first modeling campaign. The stylist looked at me, hesitant, unsure of how to dress a woman in a wheelchair. The photographer adjusted his angles, trying to figure out how to capture me without showing the chair too much. But I told him, "Don't hide the wheelchair. This is who I am, and I am not ashamed of it." That day, I didn't just break society's perception of beauty, I shattered it. Because beauty is not in the way you walk, it's in the way you rise, even when the world expects you to stay down. That was the moment I knew I was no longer the victim of my story. I was the author. And if I could rewrite my destiny, then so could anyone else. For the longest time, I believed that love had to come from others, that in order to feel valued, to feel whole, someone had to look at me and say, "You are enough." But life has a way of teaching us the hardest lessons in the most painful ways. And one of the most important lessons I learned was this: until you love yourself, nothing else will ever be enough. I had spent years looking for acceptance. First, from my family, who wanted me to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. Then, from a husband who walked away when life got difficult. And later, from a society that looked at me with pity, as if my existence was a tragedy. But the real tragedy wasn't my accident. It wasn't my broken spine or my wheelchair. The real tragedy was that I had spent my life waiting for the world to tell me that I mattered. I remember the day I finally realized this. I was sitting in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. But I wasn't looking at my face. I was looking at my scars, the ones on my arms, my legs, my body, the reminders of everything I had been through. For years, I had hated those scars. I had covered them, hidden them, pretended they didn't exist, because every time I saw them, they reminded me of what I had lost. But that day, something changed. I traced my fingers over those scars, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt pride, because these scars were not marks of weakness. They were proof that I had survived, that I had fought, that I was still here. That was the moment I decided I would never again let the world tell me what I was worth. I stopped waiting for people to love me. I stopped waiting for approval, for validation, for someone to say, "You are beautiful, you are strong, you are enough." Instead, I looked at myself and said it. I am enough. And I want every single one of you to hear this today. You are enough. Not because of how you look, not because of what you can or cannot do, not because of how the world sees you. You are enough because you exist, because you are here, because you have a heart that beats, a soul that dreams, and a fire inside you that no one can take away. When I stopped seeking love from the world and started giving it to myself, everything changed. I no longer needed to fit into society's definition of beauty, because I had created my own. I no longer needed people to stay in my life in order to feel valued, because I had already found value within myself. I no longer saw my wheelchair as something that confined me, because I had realized that true freedom isn't in the ability to walk, it's in the ability to live without fear. So I made a promise to myself. I would never again let the world define me. I would never again hide my scars. I would wear them like medals, like a story written on my skin, one that said, I survived, and I will keep writing. And I want you to make the same promise to yourself. Promise yourself that you will stop waiting for the world to tell you that you are worthy. Promise yourself that you will stop letting society decide your value. Promise yourself that no matter what happens, no matter how many people leave, no matter how many dreams shatter, you will never abandon yourself. Because at the end of the day, that is the only thing that truly, not who stays, not who leaves, not what the world says. What matters is that you choose you. I spent a long time believing that my life was over, that the accident had taken everything from me, my dreams, my future, my happiness. But I was wrong. Life had not ended, it had simply changed. And sometimes, change is exactly what we need to become who we were always meant to be. I won't lie to you, the journey was not easy. There were days when I wanted to give up, nights when I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I would ever feel whole again. Moments when the world felt too cruel, too unkind, too impossible to face. But every time I reached my breaking point, something inside me whispered, not yet, keep going. And so I did. I stopped waiting for miracles, and I became my own miracle. I stopped waiting for someone to save me, and I saved myself. I stopped seeing my wheelchair as the end of my freedom, and I realized I had never been more free. Because true freedom isn't about walking. It's about choosing. Choosing to rise when the world expects you to fall. Choosing to dream when everyone tells you that you can't. Choosing to turn your pain into power, your scars into strength, your struggles into stories that inspire others to do the same. When I embraced my journey, I discovered something beautiful. My pain had a purpose, my struggle had meaning, and my story was not just mine, it belonged to everyone who had ever felt broken, who had ever been told they weren't enough, who had ever been left behind but still chose to rise. That's why I stand before you today, not as someone who has never failed, never fallen, never felt lost, but as someone who has been through it all and still found a way to shine. And I want you to know that you can too.